He thought he was untouchable, until 5 words changed everything forever. What happens when arrogance meets legend? When modern swagger collides with old-school heart? You're about to witness the moment a cocky champion learned why some names should never be mocked. Drop a fire emoji if you think respect is earned, not given, and let's dive into this incredible story that'll leave you speechless. The neon lights of Las Vegas blazed against the desert night as the MGM Grand's main ballroom buzzed with electric anticipation. Hollywood's elite mingled with boxing legends, their champagne glasses catching the crystalline glow of massive chandeliers. Tonight wasn't about a fight. It was about celebration, honoring 5 decades of cinematic boxing through a charity gala that brought together the biggest names in entertainment and sports. Jason "the Machine" Statham strutted through the crowd like he owned the room, his custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo hugging his muscular frame perfectly. Fresh off his latest blockbuster success, where he'd portrayed an undefeatable street fighter, his ego had inflated to astronomical proportions. The British actor's swagger was infectious to some, insufferable to others, but impossible to ignore. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to anyone within earshot, his Cockney accent cutting through conversations like a blade. "The real champion has arrived." His entourage, a mix of sycophantic agents, wannabe actors, and social media influencers, erupted in rehearsed laughter, their phones already recording his every move. Statham's eyes swept across the room with predatory confidence, searching for his next victim to impress or intimidate. He'd already cornered 2 retired boxers earlier, regaling them with exaggerated tales of his training for movie roles, conveniently omitting that most of his fight scenes were carefully choreographed with stunt doubles and creative camera angles. The crowd parted as he moved, some genuinely starstruck, others rolling their eyes at his theatrical display. He paused at the bar, ordering an expensive whiskey neat, making sure everyone heard him specify the vintage. The bartender, a weathered man who'd seen countless celebrities come and go, simply nodded and poured without fanfare. But what Statham didn't notice in his self-absorbed performance was the quiet figure sitting alone in a corner booth, almost hidden in shadows. The man wore a simple black suit, nothing flashy or designer, just clean and respectful. His weathered hands wrapped around a glass of water, and his eyes, those unmistakable, kind but weary eyes, watched the scene unfold with the patience of someone who'd seen it all before. The charity auction began with thunderous applause as vintage boxing memorabilia went under the hammer. Muhammad Ali's gloves sold for 6 figures, while Joe Frazier's championship belt sparked a bidding war between tech billionaires. The energy was intoxicating, but Statham wasn't content to simply observe. He needed to be the center of attention. Gentlemen," he interrupted the auctioneer mid-sentence, standing up and spreading his arms wide. "Before we continue throwing money around like confetti, let's acknowledge the real fighter in the room." His voice boomed across the ballroom, causing hundreds of heads to turn. "Someone who's actually thrown punches that mattered, not just for cameras." The crowd murmured uncertainly. This wasn't part of the program, and the auction organizers looked visibly uncomfortable. But Statham thrived on chaos, on bending situations to his will through sheer force of personality. "I mean, we've got all these retired has-beens here tonight," he continued, his grin widening as he spotted discomfort rippling through the audience. "Boxers living off past glory, actors who peaked decades ago. But I'm here, baby, still in my prime, still making millions, still relevant." His entourage cheered loudly, but the response from the broader crowd was mixed. Some laughed uncomfortably, others whispered disapprovingly, and a few prominent figures began making their way toward the exits. The auction house staff exchanged worried glances. Statham's agent, a sharp-suited man named Marcus, tugged at his client's sleeve. "Jason, maybe we should—" "Shut it, Marcus." Statham brushed him off without even looking. His eyes were glazed with the intoxicating rush of dominating the room. This is what separates the legends from the wannabes. Confidence, conviction, the balls to speak truth when everyone else is playing nice. From his corner booth, the quiet man in the simple black suit took a slow sip of water. His expression remained neutral, but those who knew him well might have caught the slightest tightening around his eyes. He'd heard this song before. Arrogance dressed up as confidence, ego masquerading as strength. The man glanced at his watch, a modest timepiece that had seen better decades. Part of him wanted to leave, to avoid whatever ugliness was about to unfold. But something kept him seated, perhaps the same stubborn loyalty that had carried him through 15 rounds with Apollo Creed all those years ago. The auctioneer, a distinguished gentleman in his 70s, attempted to regain control of his event. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could please return to the auction." "Hold on there, Pops!" Statham's voice cracked like a whip. He jumped onto his chair, then onto his table, his expensive shoes clattering against the crystal glasses. Security guards started moving, but the event organizers waved them off, hoping to avoid a larger scene. "You want to talk about boxing legends? Let me tell you about legends." Statham's voice grew louder, more theatrical. "Real legends adapt. They evolve. They stay relevant. They don't just disappear into obscurity, mumbling about the good old days." The crowd was now completely divided. His supporters, mostly younger attendees and fellow actors, whooped and recorded everything on their phones, sensing viral content in the making. But the boxing community members, the older Hollywood establishment, and the charity organizers looked increasingly disgusted. Former heavyweight champion Evander Holyfield shook his head and made for the exit. "This is embarrassing," he muttered to his companion. Guy's never been in a real fight in his life. But Statham was just getting started. The spotlight found him naturally, as if the universe itself recognized his need for attention. "I've been in more movie fights than most of these guys had real ones," he declared, jabbing his finger at various tables. "And I looked better doing it." His eyes swept the room again, searching for the perfect target to exemplify his point. He needed someone symbolic, someone whose reputation he could tear down to build himself up. His gaze passed over retired champions, respected actors, industry veterans, and then stopped. In that corner booth, barely visible in the subdued lighting, sat a figure so still he seemed almost like a statue. Something about the man's calm dignity irritated Statham immensely. Here was someone who wasn't watching his performance, wasn't reacting to his dominance of the room. "Hey!" Statham pointed directly at the corner. "You. Yeah, you hiding in the shadows. What's your deal? Too intimidated to join the conversation?" The quiet man looked up slowly, his dark eyes meeting Statham's across the crowded room. Recognition flickered through the audience like an electric current. Whispers started spreading from table to table, growing in intensity. "Oh my God," someone gasped. "That's Rocky Balboa." The ballroom fell into an eerie hush, as all eyes shifted between the brash British actor standing on a table and the humble figure in the corner booth. Rocky Balboa. The name itself carried weight that transcended sports, movies, and generations. To many in that room, he wasn't just a fictional character, but a symbol of American determination, of never giving up when the odds were stacked against you. Sylvester Stallone, the man who had created and embodied Rocky for nearly 5 decades, remained perfectly still. His weathered face showed no anger, no embarrassment, just the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove. The years had been kind to him in some ways, harsh in others, but they had given him something invaluable: perspective. Statham's grin widened predatorily. This was perfect, better than he could have scripted. Here was Hollywood royalty, a living legend, and he was about to put him in his place, in front of hundreds of witnesses and countless recording devices. "Well, well, well," Statham's voice dripped with mock reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have genuine royalty in the house, the Italian stallion himself, Rocky fucking Balboa." He executed an exaggerated bow, his arms spread wide in theatrical mockery. The crowd's discomfort was palpable now. Many attendees had grown up watching Rocky films, had been inspired by the underdog who went the distance with Apollo Creed, who conquered Ivan Drago, who proved that heart could triumph over circumstance. Seeing their hero mocked felt personal, but Stallone remained motionless, his hands still wrapped around his glass of water. He'd faced down Ivan Drago, Clubber Lang, and Tommy Gunn on screen. He'd weathered decades of Hollywood politics, personal tragedies, and career ups and downs in real life. A mouthy British actor throwing a public tantrum barely registered as a threat. "Come on up here, champ," Statham gestured grandly. "Let's hear from the man who made getting beaten up look heroic. Tell us about the good old days when special effects meant smearing Vaseline on the camera lens." A few nervous chuckles rippled through Statham's supporters, but the majority of the room watched in horrified fascination. This wasn't entertainment anymore, it was character assassination, and they were all witnessing it happen in real time. Stallone's longtime friend and frequent co-star, Arnold Schwarzenegger, started to rise from his table, his face darkening with anger. But a slight shake of Stallone's head, almost imperceptible, stopped the Austrian oak in his tracks. Statham interpreted Stallone's silence as weakness, as confirmation that the old lion had lost his roar. The actor's confidence soared to dangerous new heights as he played to his audience of phone cameras and social media followers. "You know what I love about the modern era?" Statham continued, his voice taking on a philosophical tone that somehow made his mockery even more cutting. "We don't have to pretend that mumbling and getting punched in the face makes you a hero anymore. We've evolved past that primitive storytelling." He jumped down from the table, landing with a dramatic flourish, and began walking slowly towards Stallone's corner booth. Each step was calculated, performative, designed for maximum visual impact when the inevitable viral videos hit social media. "I mean, let's be honest here." Statham's voice carried easily across the silent ballroom. "Rocky Balboa, great character, sure, inspirational for its time, but that time has passed, hasn't it? We live in an age of real action heroes now. Guys who can actually fight, who don't need 15 takes to throw a convincing punch." Members of the boxing community shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew something Statham apparently didn't, that Stallone had trained relentlessly for those early Rocky films, that he'd taken real punishment to make the fights look authentic, that his dedication to the craft had been legendary among stunt coordinators and boxing consultants. But Statham was drunk on his own performance now, feeding off the tension he'd created. "See, the difference between then and now is authenticity," he declared, stopping just a few feet from Stallone's table. "Back then you could fake it, smoke and mirrors. But today's audiences are smarter. They demand real skill, real talent, real—" "Excuse me." The voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, but it cut through Statham's monologue like a sword through silk. Every head in the ballroom turned toward its source. Sylvester Stallone had spoken for the first time that evening. The two words hung in the air with more power than all of Statham's theatrical bellowing combined. There was no anger in the voice, no indignation, just a simple request for basic human courtesy. But the effect on the room was electric. Statham blinked, momentarily thrown off his rhythm. He'd expected continued silence, had been counting on it to fuel his performance. This quiet interruption had stolen his thunder more effectively than any angry outburst could have. "Oh, he speaks." Statham recovered quickly, forcing his grin back into place. "Please, Rocky, enlighten us with your wisdom." Sylvester Stallone slowly placed his glass of water on the table and stood up. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had learned that true strength didn't need to announce itself. At 77 years old, he still cut an impressive figure, not the bulked-up physique of his Rambo days, but the lean, weathered build of a man who had earned every line on his face. "You know," Stallone said, his voice still quiet, but somehow reaching every corner of the massive ballroom, I've been sitting here listening to you talk, and I keep thinking about something my old trainer Mickey used to say." The crowd leaned forward unconsciously, straining to hear every word. Even Statham's entourage had stopped their recording and posturing, caught up in the unexpected shift in dynamics. Stallone's dark eyes met Statham's directly, and for the first time that evening, the British actor felt a flicker of uncertainty. Those weren't the eyes of a has-been or a broken-down old man. They were the eyes of someone who had stared down real adversity and emerged stronger for it. Mickey used to tell me, "Rock, there's two kinds of tough guys in this world. There's the kind that talks about how tough they are, and there's the kind that doesn't have to." Stallone's Philadelphia accent, softened by decades in Hollywood but never fully erased, gave his words an authentic weight that no amount of British swagger could match. Statham opened his mouth to interrupt, but something in Stallone's bearing made him pause. This wasn't the cowering old man he'd expected to intimidate. This was something else entirely. "Now, I don't know you personally," Stallone continued, taking a single step closer to Statham, "but I've been watching you perform here tonight, and I gotta say, you remind me of a lot of guys I've known over the years. Guys who mistake noise for strength, who think putting others down lifts them up." The room was absolutely silent now. Even the staff had stopped their work to listen. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a masterclass in dignity under fire. "You want to talk about evolution, about authenticity?" Stallone's voice grew slightly stronger, though still controlled. "Let me tell you what I've learned in 50 years of making movies, and 30 years before that just trying to survive. Real strength isn't about how many people you can intimidate. It's about how you treat people when you have all the power and they have none." Statham felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The crowd's energy had completely transformed. Where moments before they had been watching his show, now they were witnessing something far more profound. The transformation in the ballroom was palpable. What had begun as Jason Statham's one-man show had evolved into something none of the attendees would ever forget. Stallone's quiet dignity was dismantling the British actor's bravado more effectively than any shouting match ever could. "You know what's funny?" Stallone continued, his tone remaining conversational despite the intensity of the moment. "You stand there talking about fake fights and movie punches like they don't matter, like they're somehow less real than whatever it is you think you represent." He gestured around the ballroom, taking in the faces of retired boxers, stunt coordinators, and fellow actors who had dedicated their lives to the craft of storytelling through action. "But those fake fights you're mocking, they've inspired millions of people, kids who thought they couldn't go the distance, adults who forgot they had fight left in them, people facing cancer, divorce, job loss, depression, people who found something in Rocky Balboa that helped them take one more step." Statham's jaw tightened. This wasn't going according to his script. The crowd wasn't laughing with him anymore. They were hanging on every word from the man he'd tried to humiliate. "And you want to know about taking real punches?" Stallone's voice carried just a hint of steel now. "I broke my nose 4 times making those movies. Cracked ribs, damaged my spine, tore both biceps. Why? Because I believed the story mattered enough to bleed for it." Former heavyweight champion George Foreman, sitting at a nearby table, nodded approvingly. He'd worked with Stallone on several occasions and knew the actor's commitment was genuine. "But here's the thing that really gets me," Stallone said, taking another step closer to Statham. "You're up here talking about authenticity while putting on the biggest performance in this room. You're so busy trying to prove how tough you are that you've forgotten what toughness actually looks like." The British actor's entourage had gone completely silent. Even they could see that their leader was being systematically dismantled, not through anger or aggression, but through something far more powerful: truth delivered with quiet confidence. "Real toughness is getting knocked down and getting back up," Stallone continued. "Real toughness is facing your demons in private instead of broadcasting your insecurities in public. Real toughness is building others up instead of tearing them down to make yourself feel bigger." Statham's face had gone pale beneath his tan. For the first time in years, he found himself at a complete loss for words. The silence stretched between the two men like a taut wire, crackling with tension that had nothing to do with volume or theatrics, and everything to do with the collision of two worldviews. Statham's carefully constructed persona, built on bravado, intimidation, and constant self-promotion, was crumbling under the steady gaze of a man who had learned that true strength whispered rather than shouted. "You know what the worst part of this whole performance is?" Stallone asked, his voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "It's not that you're disrespecting me. Hell, I've been in this business long enough to have thicker skin than that." He paused, letting his words settle over the crowd like snow falling on a winter landscape. "The worst part is that you're disrespecting yourself. You're standing up there acting like a carnival barker, desperate for attention, when you could be using your platform to lift people up instead of tear them down." Statham's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. For a man who had built his career on quick wit and sharp comebacks, this sudden inability to respond was devastating. His entourage watched in horror as their alpha dog was being systematically neutered by an old man who hadn't even raised his voice. "I've seen your movies," Stallone continued, and Statham perked up slightly, hoping for some kind of professional validation. "You're talented, you work hard, you've got screen presence and timing, but watching you tonight, all I can think is, what a waste." The words hit Statham like physical blows. This wasn't anger or hatred. This was disappointment, and somehow that was infinitely worse. "Because talent without character is just noise," Stallone said, his Philadelphia accent growing more pronounced as emotion crept into his voice. "And character isn't something you can fake on screen or buy with success. It's something you earn through how you treat people when nobody's watching, how you handle yourself when you have all the power." Arnold Schwarzenegger wiped his eyes, remembering his own early days in Hollywood when Stallone had quietly helped him navigate the industry's treacherous waters. Dozens of others in the audience were having similar memories of small kindnesses, private generosities, moments when Stallone had used his influence to help rather than harm. "You want to talk about evolution?" Stallone asked, taking one final step towards Statham. They were now close enough to shake hands, but the distance between them felt infinite. "Here's what I've learned after 5 decades in this business. The guys who last, the guys who matter, are the ones who remember that strength is meant to protect, not intimidate." The weight of Stallone's words settled over Jason Statham like a lead blanket. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, he was confronted with the stark difference between who he was and who he could be. The hundreds of eyes watching him seemed to see through his carefully constructed facade to the insecure man beneath. "Your time is already over," Statham had declared with such confidence at the beginning of his performance. Now, standing face to face with the man he'd tried to humiliate, those words echoed back at him like a prophecy fulfilled in reverse. It wasn't Stallone's time that was over. It was his own reign of unchallenged arrogance that had just come to a crashing halt. Stallone extended his hand, not in victory, but in the simple gesture of one human being offering respect to another. "It's never too late to be better than you were yesterday," he said quietly. "That's what Rocky taught me. That's what 50 years of falling down and getting back up taught me." Statham stared at the outstretched hand for what felt like an eternity. His entire entourage, the watching crowd, the recording phones, all of it faded into background noise as he faced the most important choice of his career, perhaps his life. He could double down, escalate the confrontation, try to salvage his image through more aggression and bluster, or he could accept the grace being offered by a man he'd spent the evening trying to destroy. Slowly, Jason Statham reached out and took Stallone's hand. The handshake was firm, genuine, and in that moment, the British actor felt something he hadn't experienced in years: humility. "I'm sorry," Statham whispered, the words barely audible, but somehow carrying more weight than all his earlier bombast. I'm really truly sorry." Stallone smiled, not with triumph, but with the genuine warmth of someone who understood that redemption was always possible for those brave enough to reach for it. The ballroom erupted in spontaneous applause, not for a winner or loser, but for two men who had shown everyone present what real strength looked like. It wasn't about perfect performances or flawless victories. It was about the courage to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, and to choose growth over ego. As the two actors embraced briefly, something profound had shifted in the room. Phones that had been recording for social media virality were quietly tucked away, as if everyone present understood they had witnessed something too sacred to be reduced to clickbait. In the days that followed, the confrontation between Jason Statham and Sylvester Stallone became the stuff of Hollywood legend, but not in the way anyone expected. Rather than becoming a viral takedown video or a public relations nightmare, it evolved into something far more powerful, a masterclass in dignity, redemption, and the kind of strength that can only be earned through experience. Statham's initial instinct had been to manage the aftermath through his publicity team, to spin the narrative or minimize the damage to his brand. But something had fundamentally changed in him during those few minutes face-to-face with Stallone. The old playbook of aggressive self-promotion suddenly felt hollow and exhausting. Instead, he chose a different path. 3 days after the gala, Statham released a video on his social media channels, not a defensive explanation or a half-hearted apology crafted by professionals, but a genuine reflection on what he'd learned from the encounter. "I've spent my career playing tough guys," he said, sitting alone in his home office without makeup or dramatic lighting. "But Tuesday night, I met a man who showed me what real toughness looks like. It's not about intimidating people or proving you're better than everyone else. It's about building others up, even when they don't deserve it." The video went viral, but for all the right reasons. Comments poured in from fans, fellow actors, and complete strangers who had been moved by his honesty. More importantly, it opened doors for Statham that his previous approach never could have. Opportunities to work with respected directors who valued character alongside talent, roles that required depth rather than just physical presence. Meanwhile, Stallone continued doing what he'd always done, using his platform to inspire rather than intimidate. He never spoke publicly about the confrontation, never claimed victory or sought credit for Statham's transformation. To him, it had simply been one human being helping another find a better path forward. The charity gala had raised more money than any previous year, not just from the auction, but from the thousands of people who donated after hearing about what had transpired that night. The story became proof that even in an age of manufactured controversy and social media outrage, authentic moments of human connection could still cut through the noise. Years later, Jason Statham and Sylvester Stallone would work together on a film, a small independent project about mentorship and second chances. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it reminded audiences why they fell in love with movies in the first place. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are about ordinary people choosing to be extraordinary. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you were wrong, learn from someone wiser, and use that lesson to become better than you were before. That's what real strength looks like. Not the loudest voice in the room, but the one with enough courage to change. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of redemption and second chances, drop a comment below and tell us about a time someone showed you grace when you didn't deserve it. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this, stories about the best of human nature, are what this channel is all about. Sometimes the most powerful victories happen not in the ring, but in the quiet moments when we choose to be better than we were before.